Good evening, Rowan. It's the 2nd of April 2016 and it's about 2 AM. And obviously I'm making you my usual video before the weekend to reassure you I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend, and especially not you. Anyway, I thought we could have a chat this evening. It's quite late because I was having a long siesta this afternoon and didn't get round to it. But I'm doing it now, and I thought we could have a chat about an article, an interview with you in the student newspaper of the University of Bristol, where you were a few weeks ago giving a lecture about meditation, and you gave this interview to the student newspaper. And I would point out that you gave this interview only days after I uploaded a video onto YouTube which demonstrated that 9/11 was a Luciferian ritual intended to destroy the old world order and its nations and religions, and bring in the new world order, the one world government, and the one world religion of environmentalism, which subjugates people to nature, subjugates human beings to nature, and teaches that we're a cancer on the earth. And the intention of this is to depopulate the earth so that the global elite can own everything, have a few slaves, the people that they want left. It's a collectivist ideology, and they just get rid of who they don't want, or they just say that you're damaging the earth or something and get rid of you. So this was one of the purposes of the events of 9/11, which you were involved in because you lied about being in Manhattan, and you told a story that didn't hang together and contradicted the story told by another person, Fred Burnham, who was there with you on the day. And I've demonstrated how you're both lying about what took place on that morning, when I doubt that you were anywhere near Manhattan. So, as I've said, you're a perception manager, a propagandist, and a purveyor of misinformation for the New World Order, and you're not a Christian, you're a Luciferian. So I uploaded this video demonstrating that you were satanic and this was a Luciferian or satanic ritual, and then a few days after that you gave this interview for this Bristol student newspaper, in which you first started belly aching about anti-Semitism, which you hadn't really mentioned very much at all before, but you can't seem to stop talking about it now for some mysterious reason. I'm sure it's because you really care about Jews. Because obviously somebody who's been puppeteered by the people who put Hitler in power really loves Jews and cares a great deal about them, don't you? So anyway, here is some comments on the slides that I've just shown. I'm not commenting on everything, just one or two things in it. So here's what the article says. When Epigram asked about the Pope's recent comments on Donald Trump's Christianity, Williams said, "I wanted to stand and cheer." I'll comment more on that in a minute. I'll just go on to say what you said next. Donald Trump's Christian credentials do seem to be a little bit slender. He apparently said that he has never had to ask forgiveness of God for anything, which is, if true, enviable. Well, you do mention quite a lot about things that the Pope says, and I think that you think if you say the Pope says something, that's going to persuade me to see your point of view and think that you're wonderful because you're agreeing with the Pope about something. But the reality is, Rowan, it's you who needs Daddy's approval, not me. You see, when I became a Catholic, at the ceremony when I became a Catholic, what I had to say in order to be received into the Catholic Church, what I said was something to the effect that I believed that what the Catholic Church taught was from God. I can't remember the exact words, but it was something along those lines. So there wasn't a clause B which said, oh, and by the way, I agree with all the Pope's political opinions about everything, and also, when he goes and we get a new Pope, even if his views are the opposite of the previous Popes on certain political things, I'm going to just change my mind and agree with him as well. I don't have to agree with the Pope's political opinions about anything, and as I've said, it's you who needs Daddy's approval, not me. And I'm going to show some clips at the end of this video to demonstrate that. Yes, because you have been up to see the Pope, a couple of popes on various occasions, partly as part of your office as Archbishop of Canterbury, but you've also done it since then as well, and it was actually your interactions with Pope Benedict XVI that first gave me the insight that you needed your father's approval and that you'd never had it. And I did say this in a letter to you in 2010. This isn't the only reason I think this, but it was one of the reasons. And I did say in a letter I wrote to you in 2010, which I've already read on YouTube, that you've become the way that you are because you were overindulged by your mother and you could never please your father. And I haven't changed that opinion, and your interactions with the Pope, as will be seen at the end of this video, are quite enlightening, really. And I also like the way you thank him for his hospitality at the beginning of one of the videos that I show. You've done that quite a few times when you've gone up there. I haven't shown every occasion, and you're trying to give the impression that you're actually staying with the Pope, which I wouldn't care about even if you were, but you do stay at the Venerable English College in Rome, so you're presenting a misleading information there. You wanted me to think you were staying with the Pope, which I don't care about anyway, because as I've said, it's you who needs your daddy's approval, not me, and rather you were staying with him than me, to be quite honest. Anyway, Donald Trump's Christian credentials do seem to be a little bit slender. He apparently said that he has never had to ask forgiveness of God for anything, which is, if true, enviable. Well, I don't know whether Donald Trump said that at all, but you never ask for any forgiveness for anything, do you? You just threaten to murder your victims and tell them they have to open their legs and get wet, and they've got no other choice. And then there's people committing suicide left, right and centre around you. So you seem to be doing very little asking of forgiveness and a lot of trying to terrorise your victims so that you can bully, abuse and manipulate the outcome that you want. Anyway, so I'll move on now to another slide. So you say that Donald Trump is campaigning on dog whistles, and you mean by that crowd-pleasing slogans. Well, I don't know anything about Donald Trump's campaign. I haven't paid any attention to it, but I do know this is an exceptionally snobbish statement when you talk about crowd-pleasing slogans. I don't know what they are, but you're implying that the people don't have the right to their opinions about whatever Donald Trump is saying, and if he's saying things that are crowd-pleasing, then that's a bad thing, and the implication about this is that there's something wrong with the crowd. You are of course superior to everybody, and it's not just that you're promoting the globalist agenda at all. Oh no, you're just a very subtle and intellectual and superior political commentator, and you can say that crowd-pleasing slogans are bad. That's because you are superior to the crowd, and the crowd's opinions are irrelevant and irrational and probably don't go along with the globalist agenda, so you wouldn't be very happy about them anyway. I don't know what they are anyway, so I'm not really commenting one way or another about what he's saying. He's taken seriously by a lot of people. He's not funny, as it were. So you believe that you're superior to Donald Trump, which is completely ridiculous because you're not superior to anybody. And as far as I know, Donald Trump hasn't sold his soul to Satan to get where he is, which you have. But another thing that really interests me is that you seem to hate Donald Trump so much. Now, I don't really care about party politics, particularly American party politics, which is certainly a ruse. It's a front for the globalist agenda, and American politics is very manipulated by globalists and their puppets. People like you, they're puppets. But what's very interesting is that you keep on and on criticising Donald Trump because it makes you feel superior. But for some mysterious reason, you never say anything about the Clintons, do you? Why don't you criticise the Clintons? Why don't you criticise Hillary Clinton for covering up and threatening women who've made plausible complaints of rape against her husband? Why don't you complain about the Clintons? Why don't you deride them in a superior way? Why don't you deride Hillary Clinton? And the reason is because she's a globalist puppet, and you're actually supporting people who are being puppeteered the same way that you are. You don't criticise the Clintons, despite all the murders and other very shady dealings that have gone on in America and in Arkansas when Bill Clinton was governor there. You never say anything about these things. Why don't you criticise the Clintons? The Clintons were in favour of the Iraq War and Donald Trump was against it. And since you were supposed to be against the Iraq War, although you weren't really because you provided propaganda which led to it, why don't you criticise the Clintons then? As I've said many times before, it's not only the things that you say that are very interesting, it's the things that you never say. So let's hear some criticism about Hillary Clinton then. You can investigate the things that I've said. Let's hear some criticism of Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton has been quoted as making similar statements to Adolf Hitler, and since you're so against anti-Semitism all of a sudden, perhaps you might want to make a comment about that as well, but I very much doubt it, because it doesn't go along with your political agenda, does it? So, this isn't a quote now, but you go on to say that a large proportion of the US population are seriously alienated from the political process, and you consider this to be a bad thing. Well, perhaps they've just woken up to the bullshit and the charade that it is. The political process is a complete sham and is being puppeteered from behind the scenes, as I've said already. So why don't you say something about that? So this is when you started complaining first about anti-Semitism, just after I'd uploaded this video about 9/11. So this is a quote now from you. Some people will unfortunately use the difficulties with Israel's behaviour as unleashing what does seem to me completely indefensible, straightforward, anti-Semite, bilious, hateful stuff. Well, this is one of your impressionistic statements here. You haven't given any evidence for any of these things. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but I think you're having a snipe at me. Well, you've made a complete fool of yourself, calling me an anti-Semite, and then you moved the goalposts in the Sunday Times again, which is what I said in my last video. Completely indefensible, straightforward, anti-Semite, bilious, hateful stuff. Well, I hadn't actually said anything about Jews then, had I? You've inferred that. By which I mean you've made it up, And as a matter of fact, I haven't said anything about Israel either, or Israelis. I haven't said anything about the behaviour of Israel. All I've said is that Israel wasn't founded to help persecuted Jews, but rather Jews were persecuted to help found Israel, which I've already demonstrated in a video that I showed. But they didn't only terrorise Jews in Europe and treat them in this vile way and dispossess them and displace them and all this kind of thing. They also then went all around the Middle East and North Africa telling Jews who were living quite happily in these places, oh, look at this terrible thing that's happened in Europe and it's going to come here and happen to you soon. And Mossad went round and said this to Jews who were living quite happily where they were and terrorised them into moving to Israel, to found Israel. And they weren't treated very well when they got there. It was a bad place for them to be living in. There weren't any facilities there for them really. A lot of them were herded into kibbutzim and used as slave labour really to build up Israel. So it wasn't a good experience for Jews moving to Israel after the Second World War. Oh, and by the way, I think sociologists generally regard Israeli kibbutzim as the most perfect expression there is, presently anyway, of the Marxist ideology. That's another thing you can look into, isn't it? Some of the people who moved to Israel moved back again because they said we're treated like second-class citizens there. This is Jews I'm talking about. Anyway, you go on to say, people who say Hitler had a point, well, they haven't got a point. Well, I don't know who's saying Hitler had a point. I mean, you haven't provided any details about that, but this is the second time you've made this statement now, so it's obviously very significant for you. But you must think that Hitler had a point, otherwise you wouldn't be working for the people who put him in power, would you? I think a policy of minimal tolerance of this in university circles is essential. We've been there, we know what anti-Semitism is. Well, that's true, we do know about the Second World War. I suppose that's what you're referring to, the Second World War and the rise of the Nazis in Germany, which I've already made a video about. But why don't you mention all the people that Stalin murdered then, all the Christians? Because you're quite an admirer of Stalin, aren't you? Who was also being puppeteered by the same people who put Hitler in power. So Hitler's kind of the fall guy, really, isn't he? He was a very bad person and he did a lot of bad things, but he's not the only person in history who did that. And in fact, Stalin murdered far more people than Hitler and ethnically cleansed people from the Ukraine and did very similar things to Hitler. In fact, there's been a long history of that going on in the Soviet Union and people being murdered for their faith and for being political dissenters and that kind of thing. But for some reason you never seem to want to mention that, despite the fact that you have a great history, a great interest in Russian history and literature and so on, so you can hardly say that you're unaware of it. You know about it perfectly well, and in fact you admire the Soviet system and you're a communist. It is a reality, this is anti-Semitism you're talking about. There are Jewish students who are feeling really intimidated because of cyberbullying. You know, chronic bullying. It's a fact, and a very uncomfortable one, but it needs facing. Well, you're not talking about Jewish students, are you? You don't care about Jewish students. When you're talking about cyberbullying, you know, chronic bullying, you're talking about me making videos about you. Well, let me tell you something. As I've already said, you know, in relation to this gaslighting you were doing in the Sunday Times last Sunday, that one perpetrator of harassment and hate crime is you. You hounded me around the country for over a decade. I'm still suffering because of all your evil bastard abuse and all the lies you've told, because you can't keep your trousers zipped up, and also because you want to destroy anyone who's actually competent and dedicated and a devoted Christian, because you just mimic these things in other people, and you have to eliminate the people who actually demonstrate them, which I also said in the letter I wrote to you in 2010, which I've already read on YouTube. So don't bother accusing me of cyberbullying you and chronically bullying you, because I'm just calling you out on all the lies and bullshit that you talk. And in fact, I'm the victim, as I keep saying, I've told you about 1,000 times now, I'm the victim and you're the abuser, Rowan. And you're not a Christian, you're a Luciferian, and you want to shut down free speech, and you particularly want to shut me up, because you don't want to be shown up for the complete and utter scumbag that you are. And you also don't want me expressing myself on YouTube, which demonstrates why you were so determined to get rid of me and destroy me in the first place. Because the fact is, if I'd been as pathetic as you went around telling everybody I was, that I was a complete lunatic and fantasist and a sex maniac and a repressed lesbian, and I can't even imagine what else you made up about me. If I was about all these things, you would have been promoting me, because that's what you always do. And I have read excerpts from your biography on YouTube to that effect as well, that you promote and support hopeless cases, and you eliminate anybody who makes you feel threatened. That's how psychopaths get themselves promoted so easily. They eliminate the competition. So you're just conforming to type. So you go on to say, the fact there's horrendous suffering and cost imposed on one community isn't a reason for demonising the other community as a whole. Well, I've already mentioned that you're the collectivist, not me, and I haven't demonised any community at all. And I haven't demonised you either. You demonised yourself by selling your soul to Satan, as have everyone else involved in the Luciferian conspiracy, which includes the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and Tony Blair, and an infinite amount of other people. So this is my final point now, that I'm quoting from this article where you're talking about safe spaces in universities. So I think we just need to listen very hard to the specifics here and always ask the question, are we muffling a real exchange of legitimate opinion, or are we rightly identifying views that are not only unacceptable but damagingly unacceptable? Well, my views are unacceptable to you, Rowan, because I think you're a psychopath, you're an abuser, you're not a Christian, you're a Luciferian, and you're being puppeteered by the globalist megalomaniacs who want to take over the whole world, rob it of its wealth, and destroy everybody else who doesn't go along with their agenda, and destroy the majority of people anyway, so they can keep the Earth's resources for themselves, because they're a bunch of complete and utter nutcases. So you really want to shut down free speech, because you want it to be you deciding what's acceptable and what isn't, which is why you had to go around interfering in my life, every aspect of my life, which was unacceptable enough in the church, but, you know, involving yourself in places where I was living and working, and universities that I was studying. Then you accused me of being prurient, despite the fact you've been gazing up my fanny for the last 20 years, more than 20 years. You're completely obsessed with my vagina, Rowan, because you never managed to get your filthy satanic hands on it, plus you never will. And as I've said, if I had no other reason to remain celibate other than the fact it pisses you off and makes you beside yourself with fury, because there's nothing at all that you can do about it, I'm never going to change. and you can't do anything about it, and you're beside yourself with fury, and that just makes me laugh. So you carry on fantasising, and all your bizarre fantasies about me can comfort you on the long, lonely nights in prison, can't they, along with your burly cellmate? And then if you don't mend your ways, they'll have to comfort you through an eternity in hell as well, won't they? But since you love Lucifer so much, you're probably looking forward to it. Anyway, I've waffled on for quite some time now, so I'll leave it there. But there are a couple of clips to play at the end to show you trying to butter up your daddy substitute. So I shall be making you another video on Sunday to reassure you I haven't seduced any priests over the weekend. So until then, I'll bid you good night. Hasta la próxima.
I see the extent to which people of faith feel victimised or marginalised. I'm not sure they always see it clearly. But I'm just a little wary of jumping too quickly into the victim posture here. As a matter of fact, we have, as religious communities, we have access to the public sphere. As Tony has said, we can be visible and audible in public discourse. The problem of most interfaith dialogue is you're talking to the people who are ready to talk to you. Yeah. And how you get to talk to the people who don't want to talk to you is, of course, a major challenge. There are different kinds of dialogue and different kinds of engagement. And there's virtually nobody that I would feel we ought not to talk to. But there are questions, I think, about how much legitimacy you want to give to some groups if there are groups who have what you might call a proven record of internally abusive or corrupt behaviour. You don't particularly want to deal particularly with a leadership that is compromised by a solid record of bad behaviour. And we know there are some religious groups like that. I guess some would draw the net quite widely there, but that's my baseline, I think. If there is a group where there is, as I say, a proven record of internal abusive or corrupt behaviour, I would not want to give any extra credence to that by publicly engaging, sharing a platform. On the other hand, there are other kinds of dialogue, there are other kinds of more private engagement. We find ways of doing that. It's always important to see yourself through other people's eyes, bishops or anybody else. Is there a difference between public and private morality? I don't think there should be, in the sense that what we think a good person looks like should not be unrecognisably different in the public or the private sphere. As you, your holiness, bring us the word of the gospel afresh.
Especially at this difficult moment.
Thank you for your hospitality, Your Holiness.
I am very, very thankful. That is your picture.
Just stand beside the And Cardinal Diaz this morning said so.
Oh, also.
Yes.
Very good man.
Very good.
Yep. Cross.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's a symbol of the cross.
Deeply appreciated. Thank you. It's very precious.
So, thank you. God bless you.
Very nice to meet you.
Podemos